Hey bitches, it's me Pallavi, and this week on Dirty Science, we're talking about the brain, the 10% myth, and other shit you keep spreading without having any idea how the brain works. But that's why I'm here, to condescend to you. Before we get into these myths, y'all need a refresher on how the brain works. The human brain weighs about 3.3 pounds, or the size of a baby. I don't know how much a baby weighs. Is it obvious? And is composed of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is what you think of when you think of a brain. It's got a left and a right hemisphere. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body because of how the neurons cross over in sending and receiving information to and from the spinal cord. So if a stroke occurs on the right side of your brain, the left side of your body might be affected. We'll get more into this later. The cerebrum overall is responsible for higher functions, including memory, speech, reason, emotion, realizing Fox News is trash, movement, all of our senses, etc. Different parts of the cerebrum, divided into what are known as lobes, are more responsible for each of these functions than the others. The second part of the brain, called the cerebellum, is located towards the back of the brain under the cerebrum. It's responsible for coordinating muscle movements, maintaining posture, and balance. The third part of the brain is the brainstem, which connects the cerebrum and cerebellum to the spinal cord. It's responsible for a lot of stuff you never have to think about, which according to my mother is anyone but yourself. Breathing, heart rate, body temperature, wake and sleep cycles, digestion, sneezing, coughing, vomiting, and swallowing. Oh yeah, we never even have to think about swallowing. The brain is composed of a lot of different types of cells. Neurons are the cells that pass messages to each other and make the brain magic. There are also a lot of supporting cells that protect neurons, supply nutrients, and help defend the brain from foreign objects. The way neurons pass messages is through action potentials. We talked about this a little bit before in episode 3 of Dirty Science, but here's a refresher. Action potentials are electrochemical. That means an electrical potential or signal travels down through these neuron cells, and then between cells, neurons communicate through what are known as neurotransmitters. When we say an electrical potential travels, that means that there are ions with positive charges, such as sodium and potassium, that flow into and out of the cell and cause an imbalance of charges between the inside and the outside of the cell all the way down the axon of the cell. This imbalance of charges is called a membrane potential. As these ions flow into and out of the cell, the electrical signal travels down the length of the axon. At the end of the axon, neurotransmitters are released, passed through a space between the neurons called the synapse, and these neurotransmitters attach to receptors on what are known as the dendrites of another neuron cell, like little messenger pigeons. This causes a change in the second neuron, enabling its ions to move in and out of its cell, causing the electrical signal to travel further. So now that you know that neurons are literally just moving ions and neurotransmitters around in order to pass a message, and that that message is responsible for how we feel, think, perceive, remember, learn, you can see why many estimates show that the brain has between 86 to 100 billion neurons. And on any day, you're using a lot of those neurons for the simplest of tasks. So is this you only use 10% of your brain thing real? Fucking no, it's bullshit. How did this rumor arise? In the 1890s, researcher William James suggested, after studying a child prodigy, that there might be a difference between prodigies and regular people. That perhaps the rest of us are only using a fraction of our brain's capabilities. And then I guess people kept spreading this rumor to make themselves feel better that they weren't Einstein. Also, maybe people misinterpreted. Neurons, the cells that are most responsible for how we think, the Beyonce of the brain, make up about 10% of all the cells in the brain, whereas the other 90% are just Kellys and Michelles. Yeah, they're very important and they're very supportive, but they're no Beyonce. But that 10% of neurons is distributed throughout the brain. Just because we're only using 10% of brain cells to pass a message doesn't mean we're not using the other 90% of cells. But I personally think this myth was spread due to insecurities. Feeling bad about what you've accomplished thus far? Blame it on your brain. Feeling bad that you now know this isn't a valid excuse? Blame it on your parents. We can still do that, right? Blame it on our parents. Our parents, just blame them for everything. Even though they came to this country, they sacrificed everything so I could have a better life. And they're badass at their careers. Still blaming it on our parents, right? Because I'm emotionally unstable and I didn't learn 6 different languages. Because I'm emotionally stunted. Because I have time to have emotions. Because I'm not surviving like they were. Because they built their lives to make sure that we weren't just surviving, we were living. We could still blame our parents, right? Okay, great. While we're at it, there's another myth we should address about being left-brained or right-brained regarding the left and right hemispheres of the brain. People say that if you're more left-brained, you're more logical, more practical, more mathematical. And if you're right-brained, you're more creative, more hippie, more dippy, looser, sluttier at parties. This is, how do I put it? Complete trash. This myth might have arisen from the fact that these two hemispheres do exhibit different functions. But those functions are a lot more interconnected than you'd think. Most people use the left brain to process language, whereas people believe the right is used to process emotion and understand each other. But it's not that simple. For example, the right brain does process some parts of language, such as intonation and emphasis. Most people, over 90%, use the left brain to process language. And about 90% of people are right-handed, meaning their left brain exhibits motor skill dominance. But 78% of those people who do not use their right hand actually use their left hemisphere for language processing. And some studies showed higher activity in the right side of the brain during flashes of insight, what feels like epiphanies in creative or problem-solving skills. Sure, this is creative, but so is language and storytelling, which is what the left side is more active during. Plus, visuospatial skills are more dominant in the right side of the brain. So how can logical or science-minded people be more left-brained? It doesn't make sense! How did this myth arise? In the 1950s and 60s, Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga, I have no idea how to pronounce that, I was just trying not to make his last name into a slur, started performing split brain studies, in which as a last-ditch effort to treat epilepsy, the corpus callosum, the connection between the two hemispheres, was cut. The researchers then studied these hemispheres independently, by sending information to only one side of the brain. For example, by showing images only to the right or left eye. The researchers found that the two hemispheres acted independently, and processed information differently. But where different types of information happens to be processed in the brain does not support the idea of being right or left brained, because everything is so interconnected. And now, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, suggests that on average we use both sides of our brain equally. So stop spreading these weird-ass brain rumors that don't make any sense. What are you doing? Just trying to comfort yourself? Oh, you're right brain. Oh, you're a Taurus. That's not gonna help you at all. Stop labeling yourself. You're limiting yourself. You're not right-brained or left-brained. You don't only have the capability to use 10% of your brain. None of these myths are true, like Santa Claus or my parents not having a favorite. I know who your favorite is. It's the dog. But how could he not be your favorite? Boo-boo. Little guy.